Earlier today, I put up a video on a little clip. I put it up on TikTok about of a slave was expressing how he felt as a man. Someone came in, non-black, and said, basically was like, it happened in the 1600s. Get over it. You know what they love to say to people who look like us. In the meantime, they don't even know the definition of get over it. Let something happen to them and their family. They're still talking about things that happened when they was 2 years old. And it's like, how do you even remember that? But I know some do remember, but I'm just speaking in regards to these insensitive people. If we still didn't see perpetuations of what occurred in the 1600s and 1700s, 1800s, we wouldn't still talk about it. Go figure. So this message is for him and everyone else who thinks like him. Plus, I believe he's Hispanic. So it's like, wow, you had the audacity to open up your mouth and say that. Get over it, huh? When has this country, aka white America, gotten over slavery? You talk about black Americans so-called rehashing the past that is constantly in our faces by way of slave movies that you love to do. Since you like doing slave movies, let me pitch some ideas to you. Do some movies that show how rotten and vile some or most enslavers were towards living people like me. You keep slavery in our faces with these tired old massa. We wouldn't know what to do without your whiteness. Do some movies showing how many revolts there actually were and why Lincoln, with his prejudiced self, presented the emancipation. Enslavers and wicked patrollers couldn't stop the revolts by those in chains who were sick of their mess, beyond sick of their mess. Your vile, perverted mess. Tell the truth. You keep the badge of slavery in our faces by constantly violating our rights. Or are your violations your way of saying black folks still aren't recognized as mankind and there aren't any rights for people who look like me? Is that your slick, undercover, racist message to the world? You are the one guilty of not letting anything go. You've shown that by centuries of hostilities against black Americans. The riots started by you, destroying our communities, stealing millions of acres of land, assaulting black women, eviscerating the image and essence and total being of black men, demolishing our children, destroying their confidence, giving them I won't go there. Next time you open your mouth to say let it go, don't. You could swallow your tongue and never speak again for all I care. This applies to non-European descendants as well. You have a habit of sticking your nose where it doesn't belong and vying for white America's attention. Now take that check to the bank and cash it because it is good. It's better than good. Now let's get on with the regularly scheduled program. After a spat of violence across Mississippi's prisons in the past few weeks, rappers Jay-Z and Yo Gotti are providing lawyers so that 29 incarcerated people can sue prison officials. Of course, this article, I think it was written back in earlier this year. Yo Gotti and Team Roc, the philanthropic portion of Jay-Z's Roc Nation empire, have provided legal representation so that inmates could file the complaint, according to CNN. The attorney for Roc Nation, Alex Spiro, represents the plaintiffs in the lawsuit filed Wednesday in a federal Mississippi court. Both Jay-Z and Yo Gotti are outspoken advocates of criminal justice reform. Individuals held in Mississippi's prisons are dying because Mississippi has failed to fund its prisons, resulting in prisons where violence reigns because prisons are understaffed. The lawsuit alleges. The lawsuit portrays the prisons as overcrowded, rife with violence, and marred by mold, flooding, and unsafe drinking water. Wow. Another article that I read stated, even before the violence at the Mississippi State Penitentiary at Parchman in late 2019 and early 2020, state health inspectors have found repeated problems with broken toilets and moldy showers. Inmates said some cell doors did not lock, and it was common to see rats and roaches. Indeed, 5 inmates have died across 3 Mississippi detention facilities in the past 2 weeks, and the statewide system, which includes 3 state prisons, 15 regional facilities, and 3 private prisons, was placed on lockdown amid alleged gang-related violence. Walter Gates, an inmate of Unit 29E at Parchman, was stabbed multiple times the night of New Year's Eve and pronounced dead just after midnight. Roosevelt Hollyman was stabbed to death in a fight the next day. Dolores Howe, an inmate of Unit 291 at Parchman, was stabbed multiple times and pronounced dead the day after that. Civil rights advocates say the violence is the result of too few prison guards and too little investment into the state's prison system. And you know why that is so. I believe there's little investment because the prison is filled with majority blacks. In wake of the deaths, Jay-Z and Yo Gotti both threatened to sue, according to the Clarion Ledger, and wrote a letter to Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant and Corrections Commissioner Felicia Hall to say they've been in touch with affected inmates and wanted to see conditions immediately rectified. The lawsuits were dismissed January 13th of this year after the inmates' attorneys in the State Department of Corrections said improvements have been made during the past 3 years, including installing air conditioning in most of the prison, renovating some bathrooms, and updating the electrical, water, and sewer systems. I want to see new pictures. Let's take a journey back in time to find out how and why Mississippi's Parchman Prison, aka continuation of slavery, came about, shall we? The state penitentiary began more than a century ago as a way to subjugate African Americans after the end of slavery, and it later maintained segregation well into the 1970s. See what I'm saying? That is why, I thank God for articles like this and discussions of like this, because most people, I believe, in this country swear up and down that the prison wasn't created to continue to put black people in chains. It doesn't matter how much proof you have showing how unjust this prison system and the law is when it comes to people who look like us. They'll still sit there and deny it. That is that denial that a lot of people are under, that spell. If they bottled that, they wouldn't have to have as many wars as they have, put it that way. They could save a whole lot of money if they could bottle and sell that kind of denial that they're under. Let's continue. Located about 100 miles south of Memphis in the Mississippi River Delta, the birthplace of the blues, Mississippi State Prison in Parchman, Mississippi has become as much a historical landmark as it is penitentiary. It's about 30 miles from where Emmett Till was murdered in 1955 and surrounded by uninhabitable swampland. Perfect place, right? When you want to keep people away and keep people locked in that crappy hole. Parchman's storied history is the basis for the prison forms featured in the movies Cool Hand Luke and Old Brother Where Art Thou? The history of Mississippi State Penitentiary is a history of failed reforms. Its creation in 1901 was born of a statewide shame and frustration at the contemporary system of convict leasing, writes David Oshinsky, historian and author of The Worst in Slavery, Parchman Form, and the Ordeal of Jim Crow Justice. In the Reconstructionist South, state's coffers were empty, prisons destroyed, and their former free labor supply was emancipated. Many southern states, including Mississippi, began arresting almost exclusively young black men on charges ranging from laundering to larceny to murder. Some were legitimate, but many were fabricated or embellished. The state began leasing the prisoners to wealthy contractors who would further sublease them to companies. The convicts under convict leasing would do the kind of work that free labor would not want to do. In other words, the work a white worker might not want to do, Oshinsky said. But poor whites began to resent the system that drove wages down for free work.
See, that's the only time they really care. I'm not talking about all white people, because there are some white people that have some genuine, beautiful hearts. But the ones that we mainly see, the only time they really, kick up some dust is when it's involving their pockets. Other than that, they can care less.
In 1904, Mississippi elected a new governor, James Kimball Vardaman, who aimed to reform the system in part to benefit the lower class whites. Parchman's first year of operation was in 1905. It was massive, remote, and modeled after a traditional southern plantation.
That's it, case in point. It was modeled after a remote southern plantations. You know them plantations that they sent slaves away that they called bad? The ones that gave them the problems, the ones that was like, because I'm tired of this, and I want to get up out of this. Those plantations where it was like, we tired of this Negro, we tired of this Negress, send him to deep south. That's how they modeled Parchman prison. Open your ears and pay attention. You might learn something. And I'm not talking to those who really want to know the truth. I'm talking to those that took that pill of denial and that strong medication called denial in capsule form, slow releasing.
Let's continue. And this other article that I'm citing was written in January 2020. It's titled, 12 Deaths in Mississippi Tell a Grim Story. The only way to fix a problem like the American prison system is to end it.
Stop being racist and treat everybody the same. If you're dealing with murderers, you don't treat this white murderer different than you treat a black murderer. If you're dealing with petty criminals, you don't treat white petty criminals different than you treat black petty criminals. Like I told someone in the comments on one of those videos, they said something about education. I'm so tired of people talking about, no, we just need to educate people about racism. You're talking to grown people. How long do you have to keep educating a grown-ass man or woman about racism? If you lived in this country long enough, you know what racism is, and you know how dangerous and deadly it is. You read the same books I read. Unless you was homeschooled and you had some racist redneck parents and they, fed you all those books written and authored by those hardcore races that I don't even understand how they sleep at night because their hearts are so black. What kind of demons come in and creep and disturb you at night? But anyway, if you're born in this country, and you don't even have to be just born in America, if you are alive in this world, you know what racism does and how dangerous and deadly it is. So how long must you continue to talk about educating people? And then all these programs you have to educate people about racism and discrimination and biasness and harassment. Has it changed? No, you want to know what to eliminate this? Stop doing it. And it's not up to black people to stop anything because we didn't start it. So the ones who started it, you stop it. Case in point, that's as simple as that. You want some water, turn on the faucet. When you're done with it, close the tap. That's as simple as it is. It's that simple. Stop it. You want people to stop talking about racism and discrimination? Stop doing it.
Let's continue. 12 people have died in Mississippi state prisons since the start of the new year. 9 deaths occurred in the Mississippi State Penitentiary at Parchman. At least one was self-inflicted for tender ears. Most were a result of violence between inmates, beatings, stabbings, and other fatal altercations. State officials have promised to stop the violence after news of 2 of those deaths broke last week. Governor Tate Reeves, a Republican who took office earlier this month, said he will work around the clock with the State Department of Corrections to respond immediately and prevent new incidents going forward.
How did that turn out?
What's striking about this situation is how little of it is new. The Parchman prison, which dates to 1904, has a long and infamous history of violence and abuse. It also has a history of reform, but no amount of change has been able to break the cycle of brutality. And why would it? The history of Parchman is a prime example of how dehumanization and neglect are intrinsic to separating people from their freedom. The Mississippi of the late 19th century was a rigid apartheid state. Its criminal justice system defined by cruel, gratuitous punishment. Black suspects bore the brunt of state violence.
Surprise, surprise.
Often arrested for petty crimes like theft, gambling, and vagrancy, traveling without a work permit or evidence of a job.
Without evidence of a work permit was AKA state IDs. You know what? A lot of these things that are instituted or came about had a lot to do with keeping tabs on black folks. You don't believe me? Look it up. The information is right there for you. If you really want to find it, you really can.
Black Mississippians were given hefty fines and lengthy sentences. They were then leased out to private companies for de facto slave labor on railroads and plantations. Conditions were abysmal. The prisoners ate and slept on bare ground without blankets or mattresses and often without clothes, writes the historian David Oshinsky. And worse than slavery, Parchman formed in the ordeal of Jim Crow justice. Convicts dropped from exhaustion, pneumonia, malaria, frostbite, consumption, sunstroke, dysentery, gunshot wounds, and shackle poisoning.
What is shackle?
Shackle poisoning, the constant rubbing of chains and leg irons against bare flesh.
That is shackle poisoning. They just had all kind of ways to mess with black folks, didn't they? If they didn't get you one way, they was gonna get you another.
In the 1880s, Oshinsky notes, the annual mortality rate for Mississippi's convict population ranged from 9% to 16%.
And that was in the 1880s.
Convict leasing was on the wane by the turn of the last century, but Mississippi's white elites were still obsessed with Negro crime.
And they still are.
Enter Governor James K. Vardaman, elected in 1903 on a demagogic platform of rural chauvinism and white supremacy. He promised to tax the planters, give aid to the white poor, and turn back social equality.
Here's the thing. Isn't racism and discrimination against the law? Okay. If that's the case, why are there so many racist white politicians? Think about it.
Vardaman was a kind of reformer. He opposed convict leasing as a public giveaway to wealthy landowners and an oppressive burden on impoverished offenders, including blacks. Vardaman would spend a lifetime fighting to deny blacks political rights and social equality, explains Oshinsky. Yet he also believed that Negroes who accepted their lowly place in a human order should be protected.
My God. The mentalities on these people.
Yet he also believed that Negroes who accepted their lowly place in the human order should be protected from abuse.
You need to flip that script around, homeboy.
Vardaman wanted a prison that would socialize black criminals into, as Oshinsky paraphrases, the idea proper discipline, strong work habits, and respect white authority.
This man is already irritating me, and I don't even know him.
Let me repeat that again. Vardaman wanted a prison that would socialize black criminals into, as Oshinsky paraphrases, the idea, proper discipline, strong work habits, and respect for white authority.
He was born a little too late. He would have been one of them enslavers. He would have been probably the biggest enslaver in the country.
He also wanted it to turn a profit. Under his leadership, the state cleared thousands of acres near the Yazoo, Mississippi Delta in an area called Parchman Place, named after the family that had owned it for years.
I knew that was the name of family. I just knew that wasn't no random name. Hey, let's call this area Parchman. That sounds good, Bobby. And probably was one of the biggest slave owners.
Workers planted crops and constructed prison buildings. The Parchman Penitentiary was born. By the 1910s, it was self-sufficient, operating on the same principles as an antebellum plantation with black convict laborers supervised by white overseers, although the share of white prisoners would increase with time. Parchman would, in short order, become notorious for its hard labor and brutality. The blues musician Bukka White immortalized his experience of the prison in a 1940 song, Parchman Farm Blues. Inmates slept on dirt floors. Violence was common. In 1954, officials added a maximum security unit where one prisoner recalled they just beat the living crap out of you.
They came to work mad at their wives, girlfriends, whoever, and was like, let me go take it out on this negress. I can't take it out on others who matters in their mind. That's what they were saying. So let's take it out on the negress.
Serious reform will come after the civil rights movement with Gates versus Collier, a class action lawsuit filed in 1971 on behalf of 4 inmates, but constructed with testimony for hundreds of prisoners. They attested to murders, rapes, beatings, and tortures.
My goodness.
One inmate, Danny Bennett, died after he was shocked with cattle prods and left unconscious under the sun in 100-degree.
Those are demons.
They also spoke to poor conditions from open sewage and polluted water supplies to kitchens overrun with insects, rodents, and the stench of decay. A federal judge would describe the prison as unfit for human habitation,
aka unfit for white prisoners. We don't care what y'all do with the negress, but that's unfit for the white man. You know what? You can't tell me that before these investigations occurred and inspections of these prisons that people in positions don't know about the conditions. They already know. It's just when they get put on blast, that's when they like, oh my God. Oh, good Lord. That's when they want to put on the dramatical performance, like an Emmy for you, an Emmy for you, an Oscar for you.
Decided for good in 1974, Gates would essentially create minimum standards for incarceration in the United States. At Parchman, this meant desegregation and civilian guards, freedom of worship, minimum living space, and an end to forced labor. It also spurred the state of Mississippi to create a Department of Corrections to oversee its penal facilities, but reform had limits. New facilities and professional staff doesn't change the fact that prisons are a place of confinement where society isolates many of its least wanted and most vulnerable members. By the 1990s, according to a report from the American Civil Liberties Union, death row prisoners at Parchman, renamed Mississippi State Penitentiary, reported profound isolation, unrelieved idleness and monotony, denial of exercise, intolerable stench, and pervasive filth. grossly malfunctioning plumbing, and constant exposure to human excrement.
This sounds like a third world country.
HIV positive prisoners in the general population told lawyers for the ACLU that they were living in a squalor, categorically segregated from the rest of the prison population and barred from all prison educational and vocational programs and jobs. Assaults between inmates, often part of rival gangs, remain common. Parchman is hardly alone in its history of violence and neglect. If anything, it's just an extreme example of conditions that occur throughout American prisons. Even so, there's worse. Last year, the Department of Justice released a 56-page report on the Alabama prison system, where guards are few and far between and where prisoners experience high rates of homicide and sexual assault. Where the New York Times reported one prisoner had been dead for so long that when he was discovered lying face down, his face was flattened. The nation's jail, local facilities where arrestees are placed pending trial or sentences, aren't much better. According to the most recent data, a 2015 report from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 1,053 people died in local jails in 2014. The leading cause, suicide, accounted for 35% of those deaths.
Again, you know why this prison system is like this. Eroded, probably resembling the pits of hell, because it's majority filled with black folks by design.
Change for Parchman and other facilities will almost certainly come. We should understand, however, that reform is only ever temporary. There's only so much you can do within the paradigm of incarceration. A prison may or may not be humane, but it will always be dehumanizing. The isolation, the lack of liberty, the separation from family and community are anti-ethical to human life. In which case, the only way to fix a problem like the American prison system is to end it. But for an unequal, racially stratified country like ours, the destination is on the far horizon, if it's on the horizon at all.
Here's my take. Ooh, it seemed like the majority of people who are talking about prison being an extension of slavery is majority black people. You know, when it comes to us, it's majority us talking about it till people either get tired of hearing it and they step in and do something about it, or they can't continue to turn the deaf ear. You know, you got pressure from the public and they have to do something about it.
And then you do have other non-black people who know what the prison system is about. But the thing is, the problem is you don't have enough people talking about it that are non-black. You know what I'm saying? And I'm so tired of it. I wish they get rid of the anti-racist statement. Just get rid of it. Throw it back in the year that you guys start saying it. When did they start saying it? In 2020? Take that word and toss it back in 2020, because it really doesn't mean anything. And I'm so tired of hearing
this I'm anti-racist. We just have to be anti-racist. And there's no place for racism here.
Stop lying. Because if all these places that claim there's no place for racism, why is there still racism? And for all these people who are supposedly anti-racist, why is there still racism? Can you answer that simple question? It's all a game. Let's play this game in public, and we can do whatever the hell we want to in private, because we've been doing it for centuries. Like incidents in the life of a slave girl. She said that her enslaver, Dr. Flint, he put on this big show and dance in front of everybody, but he dreaded everybody knowing the truth about how despicable and perverted he actually was. That's how racists are. They put on a show and dance in public like they have bleeding hearts and understanding and want to be the most fairest person on the face of the earth. But in private, it's the opposite. Because if it wasn't true, why are we still talking about the same thing and dealing with the same thing? Granted, a lot of things that happen isn't about racism. I believe it. You just have some ignorant selfish people, narcissistic people in the world, whether they're white, black, Asian, Mexican. They may come off like they're racist or biased, but it might not even be that. It might just be them just being insensitive jerks. But you do have racism in this country, and the more you keep denying it, the worse it's going to get. It's going to implode. It's probably imploding now. It's going to be like a balloon that you putting too much air in it and just burst. That's how this situation is going to become. The people that keep denying propers to black Americans, the ancestors of those that you put in bondage, the ancestors of those that you stole land from. That's a whole different topic in itself. That's why those who put our ancestors in chains have no problem with letting you think you came from Africa. And that's a different topic. Because like I said in my other video, are you going to believe the people who put your people in chains and hid your identity? You gonna believe when they tell you where you came from? An African-American history professor told me this in the 1990s. She said that the majority of our black history books are in a library in Simi Valley. Now ask yourself why. Why do you have our history books in the Simi Valley Library? See what I'm talking about? All right, people. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for watching these videos, and I'd appreciate it if you like, share, and subscribe and comment. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a good day.